Workers affected by extended COVID-19 lockdowns will soon have access to a new federal government payment of up to $500 a week. The Prime Minister had been resisting pressure to provide more support for Victorians left high and dry by the latest lockdown. Today's announcement comes as the government confirms it's backing a plan for a new purpose-built quarantine facility here. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
Masked up and locked down, Melbourne restaurant worker Jess Taylor's gone from 40 hours a week to 0.
I think I'm going to have to ask my parents for help, which is so sad.
Resilience, strength, character, determination. That's what beats a virus. Never fear.
But money helps too. A temporary COVID disaster payment will now be available for any lockdown that lasts more than 7 days. $500 for anyone older than 17 who works more than 20 hours a week, and $325 for people who work less than that. Payable only if they've exhausted any pandemic leave and have less than $10,000 in their bank account. That'll exclude Jess Taylor. She's been saving for a house deposit.
I feel really upset.
We're talking about someone getting through the next week, where every dollar counts.
The Prime Minister has been dragged kicking and screaming to his announcement today.
By Victoria's acting Premier.
The responsibility of the federal government is income support for workers. That is solely their responsibility.
Exactly how many Victorians might apply for the emergency payment or how much it'll cost, not yet known.
For every 100,000 people, that would be $50 million per week.
With an estimated 500,000 casual workers in Melbourne alone, the cost could be well in excess of $250 million.
Cost should be shared.
That will be sorted out at tomorrow's National Cabinet meeting.
We've seen a terrible economic and health situation rapidly become politicised, and that's in nobody's interest. It's essential that one of the lessons out of this is that the politics gets put to one side.
Behind the scenes, the federal government's questioned why the Victorian lockdown should have been imposed on regional towns that haven't had COVID cases for more than a year. But there is agreement on a plan to build a new 500-bed quarantine facility on the outskirts of Melbourne, probably next to Avalon Airport. Victoria demanding the Commonwealth pay the lion's share. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
And for more on this, Margaret Paul joins me now from Spring Street. So, Margaret, what more can you tell us about this proposal?
Good evening, Tam. Well, it isn't signed yet, but the federal government has delivered a memorandum of understanding essentially backing Victoria's proposal for a purpose-built quarantine facility on the outskirts of Melbourne. Now, there are lots of questions. We still don't know who will pay for it. Victoria had asked that the Commonwealth foot the entire bill for the $200 million build of the facility, but that detail is still to be played out. There was also a suggestion that if it's at Avalon Airport itself might also contribute to the bill, but that's yet to be determined as well. There are questions about the timeline and also how many beds could be included in the facility. National Cabinet meets tomorrow, so we should find out more then.
Now, Margaret, we also heard a short time ago that 2 positive cases have now been reclassified. What are the details there?
This is a really interesting case, Tam. So these 2 cases are a woman who supposedly caught the virus while at a display home in Nicholum in Melbourne's outer north. She contacted the ABC yesterday and said that she'd returned a negative test. That case was under review and, as you say, it's now been classified as a false positive. The other is a man who tested positive after visiting the outdoor area of the Brighton Beach Hotel and then visited several sites in Anglesea, triggering a whole range of exposure sites in that coastal town. Now, it's great news that those 2 people don't have COVID and that those exposure sites in Anglesea are now bumped off the list. But it will renew pressure on the lockdown because what's interesting is that these were 2 of about half a dozen examples of what authorities called fleeting transmission or stranger-to-stranger contact. And this was cited as evidence that the virus was spreading in different ways and it was more transmissible, and part of the reason why Victoria needed this longer lockdown. So it's really interesting that these 2 cases are now being reclassified as false positives. So they've been removed from the official case count, and that takes the total number of coronavirus cases in Victoria to 67, Tam.
Margaret Paul, thank you. Well, on the eve of the lockdown extension for Greater Melbourne, Victoria has reported 2 new locally acquired COVID cases. A record number of Victorians fronted up for COVID testing yesterday. more than 57,000. And we've seen unprecedented numbers with vaccinations too, nearly 24,000 in state-run hubs, plus a similar number at GP clinics. But as Victorians queue up to get their shot, health authorities admit supplies of the Pfizer vaccine are running low.
We've been told to get it, but we can't get enough of it.
Clearly there's been a surge in demand for vaccines. And there's not the supply to be able to meet that at the moment.
Victorians calling the booking hotline today were told doses of the Pfizer vaccine had run out and to try again next week, while the Austin Hospital is booked out for Pfizer doses for the next fortnight. Victoria's 160,000 strong stockpile is all accounted for by current bookings. Second doses will come from Canberra.
We are still vaccinating at the moment. I think in terms of forward bookings, there's a shortage, but I'm not sure exactly when that supply will become available.
They get around 71,000 Pfizer a week, but if there are issues that need to be addressed there, then we're happy to address them.
There's some positive news with today's new cases already isolating. It includes a child linked to the City of Whittlesea cluster and a staff member from Stratton Finance in Port Melbourne. Overnight, one mystery case was linked back to an existing case, but 3 other mystery cases still remain, and that's what has authorities most worried.
We don't do this because we want to, we do it because we have to.
Regional Victoria will come out of lockdown tonight, but it's little comfort for Melburnians who still have another 7 days to go. But with just 2 new infections recorded since yesterday, the state has left the door open to easing restrictions earlier, should the caseload allow it.
It is a day-by-day analysis about how we are tracking, and if we can do things earlier, we will.
And while Year 11 and 12 students return to the classroom tomorrow, there's a push for more students to get back sooner.
The damage that's being done to our young people is extraordinary. They've missed so much school last year. They missed school during February. We need to get them back into the classroom.
Contact tracing will get better with QR code check-ins mandatory at all supermarkets. But enforcing the rules may prove difficult.
In IGA stores, we do have a number of elderly customers who do shop with us who don't have a phone.
And lack of information is still causing problems for non-English speakers.
I didn't know I had to create a QR code for my shop. I thought it was only for restaurants, so I didn't register and I didn't know.
Jin Mei Chen runs a grocery store and only found out she needed a QR code when the authorities called.
I hope the government can pay more attention to older Chinese people who are doing business or other migrants and give us more support.
An empty city beginning the slow way to freedom. Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
While we've been breaking records when it comes to vaccine take-up, the staged nature of the rollout means there are many people who want to be immunised but aren't eligible. Teachers who'll be returning to the classroom with Year 11 and 12 students are calling for priority access. And thousands of other frontline workers are still yet to be vaccinated, even though they were included in the early stages of the Commonwealth's rollout.
After a week teaching from home, Simon Steele will be back at school tomorrow.
I'm excited to get back in the classroom and actually see the students' faces rather than through a laptop screen.
Mr Steele hasn't been vaccinated. It's because he's under 40 and isn't eligible, and that's something that makes him nervous.
We're interacting with students and other adults who have potentially been exposed to the virus.
Aged care workers were able to jump the vaccine queues this week, but not teachers.
Our staff in our schools, preschools and in TAFEs haven't received that priority, and we continue to call for that.
Only half of Victoria's ambulance staff have received their first dose, and it's worse outside Melbourne.
If we don't have the supply available to get it into some of the more remote areas in rural Victoria, then we just can't use those options.
Paramedics were included in the Phase 1A rollout months ago, but the union says they still need priority access.
As of today, they're in the same queue as any other member of the public.
These Victoria Police officers received their jab today. The service is refusing to say how many of its 16,000 members have done the same.
Come through.
Victoria's latest COVID outbreak has triggered a wave of demand for vaccines.
It just was the tipping point where the virus actually hit home.
There's now enough AstraZeneca to go around. Even if they could get Pfizer here for the under 50s, clinics like this don't have fridges to store it at -70.
We can actually share a fridge if this is an expensive exercise. to store it in one location, and then the GP clinics can access it from one clinic.
It was another busy day for the state's vaccine hubs, following a turnout of more than 23,000 yesterday. Christian Silva, ABC News, Melbourne.
As we've mentioned, restrictions will be easing in regional Victoria at midnight tonight, but Melburnians considering making a dash to country areas have been warned there's a high chance they'll be refused service. Police say it's too much of a drain on resources to monitor a hard border, and that it'll fall on regional business owners to help check if their customers are legally permitted in their stores.
In the town of Woodend, just north of Melbourne, the local brewery is usually bustling with tourists from the city at this time of year.
Business is probably about 90% of what we can see coming up to Woodend. So with having that loss on our business is astronomical. It's devastating.
Regional hospitality venues can reopen for seated patrons only tomorrow, but a ban on Melburnians leaving the metro area is a major hurdle for towns on the city's fringe.
Without the people coming up from Melbourne, this town and a lot of other towns around the area are really going to suffer, without that financial income. Because the locals, they do their best to support, but there's just not enough of them.
Day trippers, I guess, and for us, for instance, they're 80% of our business, say, on a Sunday.
From tomorrow, regional business owners like Louise Pennell will also be helping police the restrictions. She'll be responsible for checking drivers' licences to judge whether their customers are allowed to be there.
Obviously, we're happy to do whatever we have to do at the moment.
It's part of the state government's plan to avoid policing a hard border to keep Melburnians out of regional Victoria.
This is a more effective way to deal with it rather than have a ring of steel, which is very resource intensive.
Police will also be cracking down on those fleeing the city to holiday homes in the country.
Victoria Police conducting spot checks. There's a reason why we need to have those enforcements, and if necessary, fines will be issued.
Despite the easing of restrictions being welcomed, the virtual ring of steel around Melbourne is still impacting regional businesses, with many events cancelled over the Queen's Birthday long weekend for the second year in a row. The annual Rutherglen Winery Walkabout is a huge draw card for the region, but they've had to postpone it.
At the moment, we've sold nearly 10,000 tickets. Yeah, it is a bit of a shame to have to refund some people who are planning on pivoting to other opportunities.
And Ballarat's junior basketball tournament, which attracts 7,000 people annually, has been cancelled again, leaving a $4.5 million hole in the city's economy.
We're talking about all of the accommodation houses that have had cancellations now, all the cafes, restaurants and hotels that would have been full over that 3-day tournament as well.
Leaving an empty feeling across the state. Sarah Lawrence, ABC News.